Close your eyes and picture the Vikings. What comes to mind? Longships cutting through gray ocean water. Warriors with braided beards and furland cloaks. A culture so bold and so free that they named their afterlife a hall of eternal feasting. We picture them as the world's most liberated people. No rules, no shame. Just raw, uncomplicated life lived on their own explosive terms. And surely the thinking goes. Their intimate lives reflected all of that. Passionate, equal, wild. But what if I told you that for most Viking women, marriage was a transaction their fathers negotiated while they stood in another room? That a slave woman captured in a raid had nobody that the law recognized as her own? That the most feared word in the entire Norse world was not a curse or a battle cry, but a single whispered accusation about what a man did in bed? Today, we are pulling back the surface and looking at what Viking sex life was really like. And I promise you, it is not what the television shows have been selling you. There is a phrase buried in the old Norse sagas that does not translate neatly into English. In Makapki, the mighty passion, it appears in poetry written by warriors who wanted women they could not have. It shows up in love songs and laments. And when you encounter it, something about it feels startlingly modern. It feels like something a person today could write and mean completely. The yearning in it is completely human and completely recognizable across 1,000 years. But here is the thing about that phrase. Having a feeling and being allowed to act on it were two entirely separate things in Viking Scandinavia. For the vast majority of Norse people, the life of the heart and the life of the household ran on completely different tracks, and the institution that was supposed to connect them, marriage, had almost nothing to do with love at all. A Viking marriage was at its core a business deal between two families. When a Norseman decided the time had come to start a household, he did not seek out the woman he had feelings for and declare himself. He sat down with his father, his brothers, and whoever else carried weight in his family. They looked at the available options the way a merchant looks at trade routes. Who had land? Who had cattle? Who had the right connections to shore up an alliance? Who could extend the family's reach into a new territory or provide protection in a blood feud? The young woman was not part of this conversation. Her consent was not the point. The actual marriage process began when the groom and his male relatives traveled to the bride's family. They came bearing gifts, and then they negotiated. At the center of that negotiation was something called the mund, the bride price. This was a formal payment from the groom's family to the bride's family. It was compensation for the loss of her labor and a public proof of the groom's means. The amounts involved could be enormous: land, livestock, silver. Sometimes even fighting men pledged to serve. The bride's family then brought their own contribution to the table, the dowry, and when the numbers on both sides were agreed upon, the two families signed a contract that was as binding and as cold as any commercial treaty you could imagine. The young woman technically could voice her opinion. She could express reluctance. But under the law, the final decision rested with her male guardian, usually her father. Now, the sagas do give us a quiet warning. Ignoring a woman's will was dangerous. Many stories show marriages forced against a woman's wishes, ending in disaster. Death, revenge, betrayal. The Vikings understood something very practical. A furious wife could destroy a household, but that was not freedom. That was risk management. Once the wedding happened, the Norse wife took on the title of husfru, the lady of the house, and within that role, she actually held real power. She managed every resource in the household. She controlled food. She oversaw servants and slaves. She held the keys to every locked chest and storage room. Those keys were not symbolic. In a harsh Scandinavian climate, the person who controlled food and storage controlled survival itself. That was, as she could own property. She could inherit wealth. And if the marriage failed, she could leave. Divorce in Viking society was surprisingly accessible. A woman could declare it in front of witnesses and walk away. If her husband abused her repeatedly, she could leave. If he abandoned her bed for years, she could leave. If he failed her in intimacy, she could even leave for that. Yes, that was a legal reason. But here is where the picture darkens. A powerful Viking man was not expected to remain faithful. He could have multiple women. These secondary women were called friller, concubines. This was not hidden. It was a sign of status. The The more women a man kept, the more powerful he appeared. Some women entered this role willingly for survival. Others had no choice at all. And beneath even that layer was something far worse. Slavery. The Viking world ran on it. Raids across England, Ireland, and Europe were not just for gold. They were for people. Women were taken deliberately. On se captured. A woman lost everything. Her name, her rights, her identity. She became property. Her master could do anything to her. There were no laws protecting her. No consequences for abuse. Archaeology confirms it. Skeletons of foreign women in Scandinavia. Signs of violence. Evidence of forced relocation. The Viking slave trade stretched across continents. Women were sold into markets in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. And genetic studies today show something haunting. Modern populations carry their DNA. Their story did not end. It was absorbed into history itself. One of the most chilling accounts comes from a man named Ahmad Ibn. He witnessed a Viking funeral in the 10th century. A slave girl volunteered to die with her master. 4 days, she was treated strangely well. Fed, given drink, watched closely. Then the ritual began. She was taken from tent to tent. Men used her one after another, each one telling her it was done out of loyalty to the dead man. Then she was taken to the ship, held down strung-led, stabbed, killed as part of the burial, all while warriors beat their shields so other slaves would not hear her screams. This was not myth. It was recorded observation. And yet, here is the contradiction. The Vikings worshipped Freya, a goddess of love, desire, and sexuality. She represented freedom, passion, power. But real women did not live that freedom. Instead, society was controlled by fear and honor. There was one word more dangerous than any insult. Ergi. To accuse a man of it meant social death. It implied weakness, submission, loss of masculinity. And that accusation could legally justify killing him. Honor in Viking society was everything. For women, the pressure was different, but just as intense. Their value was tied to loyalty and purity. Adultery could lead to death. A husband could kill both his wife and her lover without punishment, but she had no such right over him. Even from birth, life was uncertain. Fathers could choose whether a newborn lived or died. Baby girls were more often abandoned, left outside to die from exposure. Some historians believe this created a shortage of women. Too many men. Not enough wives, and that imbalance may have fueled Viking raids across Europe. More men with no future at home. More violence abroad. Now, pause for a moment and think about what all of this really means. Because the Viking world was not simple. It was not just brutal. It was not just free. It was both at the same time. And that contradiction is where the real story lives. Imagine a longhouse in the middle of winter. Outside, the wind howls across frozen land, snow piles against wooden walls. The sun barely rises, and when it does, it brings no warmth. Inside, the fire burns low, smoke curling toward the roof beams. This is where life happens. Families gather here. They eat, ere. They sleep here. They survive here. And inside this space, power is constantly shifting. At the center of it sits the wife. She holds the keys at her belt. Metal clinks softly when she moves. Every chest, every storage box, every hidden supply of food answers to her. If she decides to ration strictly, the household lives. If she miscalculates, they starve. This is not symbolic authority. This is life and death control. But Ebeneri, even in this position of power, there are limits. Because sitting not far from her may be another woman. A concubine, a frilla. You can imagine the silence between them. They share the same roof, the same man, the same space, but not the same status. The wife is law, the concubine is tolerated, and that tension, it never disappears. The sagas are filled with these stories. Quiet rivalries, sudden violence, jealousy that burns slowly until it explodes. Because this is not just about love. It is about survival status, and control. Now step outside that longhouse, walk away from the warmth, into the cold air, past the farms, toward the shoreline. There, pulled up against the frozen edge of the sea, is a LONG dotted weights, and around it, young men gather. Not boys anymore, but not yet settled men either. Men with no land, no inheritance, no wife waiting for them. Men who look at that longship and see something more than wooden sail. They see escape. They see opportunity. They see a future that does not exist at home. Because if there are not enough women to marry, if wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few, if power belongs only to those already holding it, then the only way forward is outward. This is how raids begin. Not just with greed, but with imbalance. The longship cuts through dark water. Days pass, then weeks, and finally, land appears on the horizon. A monastery, a quiet coastal settlement that has no idea what is coming. The attack is fast. It always is. Doors broken, people running, fire spreading, and in the chaos, something very specific happens. Women are taken. Not randomly, not accidentally, deliberately, because in this world, women are not just people. They are value. They are labor. They are status. They are currency. And once they are taken, everything changes. For those women, there is no path back, no legal identity, no protection, no voice. They are absorbed into a system that does not recognize them as individuals. And yet, even inside that system, something human survives. History does not always record it clearly, but it is there if you look closely. Small details. A bracelet buried with a body. A pattern of wear on bones showing years of labor. Traces of diet changes that reveal where someone came from. These are not just data points. They are lives. Interrupted back in Scandinavia, life continues. The longhouse fills again. New faces appear. Some willingly. Some not. Children are born. And here is where the story becomes even more complex. Because those children, they belong to both worlds. The father's lineage is Norse, but the mother may not be. She may come from Ireland, from England, from lands far away from snow and fjords. And over time, these lines mix, cultures blend, languages shift, and slowly, quietly, history rewrites itself. Now think about belief, because belief shapes everything. The Vikings did not see themselves as villains. They believed in honor, in strength, in fate. In the idea that life was short and glory mattered. Their gods reflected that. War gods, trickster gods, gods of death and desire and chaos, and among them, the idea of fate stood above all. Everything was already written. Your birth, your death, your victories, or failures. You could not escape it, only meet it. If everything is already decided, then what matters is how you face it, not what you do. This is why violence could exist alongside poetry, why brutality could exist alongside beauty. A Viking could compose a love poem one day and take part in a raid the next, not because they were confused, but because, to them, these things were not contradictions. They were just parts of life. And this is where modern ideas struggle. We want clear categories. Good or bad, right or wrong, free or oppressed. But the Viking world does not fit neatly into those boxers. A woman could have legal rights and still be forced into marriage. She could control a household and still live under a system that allowed others to be enslaved. She could initiate divorce and still exist in a culture that valued her differently from a man. So what does all of this tell us? It tells us something uncomfortable. That freedom is not always equal, power is not always fair, and progress is not a straight line. When people today romanticize the Vikings, they often focus on the surface, the ships, the battles, the strength. But the deeper reality is far more complicated. It is a world where love existed, but was controlled. Power existed, but was uneven. Freedom existed, but not for everyone. And understanding that does not make the story less interesting. It makes it real. Now, imagine standing at the edge of that world. The longship is gone. The fire is burned out. The voices are silent. All that remains are fragments. Bones in the ground. Stories in sagas. Echoes in language and DNA. And from those fragments, we try to rebuild what life was like. Not perfectly, but honestly. Because history is not just about what happened. It is about what it felt like. The fear. The hope. The choices people made within the limits they were given. And when you look at the Viking world through that lens, something changes. It stops being a fantasy and starts becoming something much closer to us. Because in the end, the Vikings were not just warriors. They were people, living in a system that shaped them, just like every society shapes the people inside it today. So the next time you picture them, do not just see the ships. Don't see the longhouse. Don't see the quiet negotiations. See the power struggles. See the people who had choices, and those who did not. Because that is where the real story lives. Not in the myths, but in the reality behind them.